Working the night shift at Subway was supposed to be a simple way to make some extra money while I was in college. I took the job at a location in a mid-sized town in upstate New York. The store was small, tucked into a strip mall that had seen better days, with mostly empty storefronts around it. The night shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and for the first few weeks, it was pretty dull, mostly cleaning, restocking, and the occasional late customer. My manager, Linda, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s. She warned me that the nights could get weird, especially because the store was old and had a history, but I brushed it off as typical small-town superstition. There were a few strange things, like how the thermostat would randomly drop in temperature, making the kitchen uncomfortably cold, or how the security cameras sometimes glitched and showed static for a few seconds at a time, but nothing I couldn't handle. One night, about a month into the job, around 3 a.m., I was wiping down the tables when I noticed the front door's chime ring. Odd, because we were supposed to lock the door at midnight, and the mall's security was supposed to have patrolled already. I looked toward the entrance, but no one was there. Assuming it was the wind or a faulty sensor, I shrugged it off and went back to cleaning. Minutes later, the chime rang again. This time, I walked to the door, peeking out, but still no one was in the parking lot. Then I heard footsteps on the pavement, slow and deliberate, circling the front of the store. I pulled back inside, locking the door manually, but the footsteps continued, fading away after a few minutes. I started to feel unsettled, but told myself it was probably some prankster or just my imagination. Later that night, as I was making sandwiches for the very few customers who came in, mostly delivery drivers, I heard a faint whispering coming from the back storage room. I paused, listening carefully. It was soft but unmistakable, words I couldn't quite make out. I grabbed my phone to check the time, and the whispering stopped immediately. Curious, I decided to check the storage room. It was empty except for supplies and cleaning equipment. The only thing out of place was a set of footprints on the dusty floor, barefoot, large, and heading toward the walk-in freezer. That sent a shiver down my spine. The walk-in freezer was the oldest part of the store. It was noisy and drafty, and the light flickered every time you opened the door. I shined my phone light inside, but saw nothing unusual, just pallets of frozen veggies and bread. I locked it back up and went to the front counter to finish my shift. Over the next couple of weeks, the strange occurrences grew more frequent. The lights would flicker at random intervals. Items like the sandwich bread and tomatoes would sometimes be misplaced, even though I was sure I had left them in order. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. Like someone was always just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. One night, I was cleaning the floor behind the counter when I heard heavy breathing right behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The back door, which I always locked, was slightly ajar, creaking in the cold breeze. I closed it firmly, double-checked the lock, and returned to work, but my heart was pounding. I tried to bring up these incidents to Linda, but she just brushed them off as stress or the building settling. "You're tired, Sarah," she said once. "You're imagining things." But then one night, everything came to a head. It was a Friday, and the store was nearly empty when the clock hit 2 a.m. I was finishing up some cleaning when the door chime rang again. I looked up, and through the glass, I saw a figure standing outside. A woman. She was wearing what looked like a Subway uniform, but faded and torn, like from decades ago. Her hair was long and dark, hanging over her face, and her skin was pale, almost translucent. She didn't move or speak, just stood there, staring. I froze. My phone slipped from my hand, shattering on the tile floor. When I finally blinked, she was gone. I ran to the front door and checked outside. No one. But the sidewalk was wet, though it hadn't rained all day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I searched online to see if the store had any history of strange events or accidents. What I found unsettled me. Apparently, 20 years ago, a young woman named Emily worked the night shift at that very Subway. One night, she was found dead in the walk-in freezer. The official report said it was an accident. She'd slipped and hit her head on the metal shelf. But rumors said she'd been locked inside deliberately by someone who was never caught. No one had worked the night shift at that location for years after the incident, until recently when the store reopened. The next time I worked, I brought a small tape recorder to capture any sounds. Around 3 a.m., I heard the whispering again. This time it was clearer. Help me. I felt a cold breath on my neck and spun around. No one. The recorder picked up soft footsteps moving around the store, but no one was visible on the cameras. That night I called Linda again and told her I wanted to quit. She looked at me with tired eyes. "You're not the first," she said, "but the store needs someone to keep the lights on." "I don't care," I said. "This place isn't safe." I left that night and never came back. Later, I heard the subway closed for good. Years after, I still think about Emily. I wonder if she's still wandering those aisles, waiting for someone to hear her plea. Story the end. Working the night shift at the subway on the corner of 14th and Maple was never anything special, at least not until that week in late October. I had been there for a few months, mostly on weekends or evenings when the regular staff couldn't cover. The store was in a sketchy part of town, sandwiched between a closed-down laundromat and a pawn shop that always had someone sitting outside, smoking. The neighborhood wasn't great, but the rent was cheap, and the job was easy enough for a college student like me. Most nights were quiet, except for the occasional weird customer or someone coming in just to warm up. But things got weird. I remember the night started like any other. I clocked in at 3 p.m., doing the usual prep work, slicing meats, chopping veggies, and making sure everything was stocked. The afternoon rush was manageable. Families stopping by after school pickups, a couple of construction workers looking for a quick bite, and the usual steady stream of customers who looked like they'd been hanging around the neighborhood all day. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, sterile glow over the place. At 7 p.m., my manager left, reminding me I'd be alone until closing at 10. I was fine with that. I liked the quiet hours where I could zone out and just do my job. The security cameras were rolling, and I had the keys to the front and back doors. Everything felt normal. Around 8:15, a guy came in. He was tall, wearing a worn black hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled down low. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and he kept his head down as he shuffled toward the counter. No greeting, no eye contact. "Hey, welcome to Subway. What can I get for you?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. He mumbled something I couldn't quite catch. "Sorry, can you repeat that?" "Turkey, no cheese, no veggies." I nodded and got to work. As I layered the turkey on the bread, I stole glances at him. His fingers were long and pale, almost claw-like, and he didn't blink much. Something about him felt off, like he wasn't really there. When I handed him the sandwich, he shoved a crumpled $5 bill onto the counter and shuffled toward the door. "Have a good night," I called out. No response. I locked the door behind him. The next few hours passed without incident, just the hum of the refrigerators and the faint sounds of traffic outside. But at about 9:30, I heard the door chime again. I looked up and saw the same guy walk in. He didn't say a word, just stood at the counter staring at me. The room suddenly felt colder. "You're back," I said nervously. He nodded slowly. "You're alone." "Yeah, just me." He stepped closer, and I noticed his eyes, pale, almost translucent, with no pupils. A chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The emergency lights kicked on, casting eerie red glows and long shadows across the walls. I fumbled for my phone, but realized it was dead. No way to call anyone. I heard scraping sounds coming from the back of the store, like nails dragging across metal. My heart hammered. I looked toward the kitchen door. The handle rattled. "Who's there?" I called out, voice shaking. No answer. The man was gone. I grabbed the keys from the counter and bolted through the back exit into the alley. The cold night air hit me like a wall. I didn't stop running until I got to my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. I never went back that night. The next day, I called my manager, told her what happened, and quit immediately. Sometimes when I'm home alone, I swear I still hear the faint scraping of nails on metal and the echo of that cold voice whispering, "You're alone." Story the end. The night I started working the closing shift at Subway, I didn't think much of it. It was just another job, one I took because I needed extra money while I was in school. The store was in a quiet part of town, inside a rundown strip mall that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. The neighborhood was mostly dead by 10 p.m., and the only regular customers were late night drivers or the occasional group of teens looking for something cheap and quick. I was assigned the 6 p.m. to midnight shift, mostly alone after about 9 p.m. The manager, Mark, said he trusted me enough to handle closing by myself, and I thought it was fine. I preferred working alone anyway. The first couple of weeks went smoothly enough. I learned the routine: restock, clean, prepare the fresh veggies, and wait for the last customers to trickle in. By 10:30, it was usually dead silent, and I was left with the humming of the refrigerators and the flickering fluorescent lights. That quiet started to get to me more than I expected. One night, about a week into my closing shifts, I was wiping down the sandwich counter after a slow evening when I heard the door chime. Ding. I stopped and looked toward the front glass door, expecting to see a customer or maybe someone coming back inside for something they'd forgotten. But the lot was empty. The clock read 11:15 p.m., well past closing time. The door was locked tight, and from where I stood, no one was visible. I shrugged and went back to cleaning, but a knot had already formed in my stomach. That same night, when I went to the back room to grab a mop, I heard whispering from the front of the store. I stopped and listened hard. It wasn't loud enough to make out words, more like soft murmurs. The sound was barely there, but it felt like it was coming from the sandwich prep area. I walked back carefully, but there was no one there. I told myself it was just my imagination. The next few nights, the strange things only got worse. The door chime would ring even when the doors were locked. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps pacing just outside, but no one would be there when I looked. One night I heard something tapping on the glass door. I shone my flashlight outside and saw the parking lot empty, except for a beat-up car with a cracked windshield parked near the edge. The tapping stopped, and the car's interior light flickered on and off. I felt a cold chill and locked the door behind the counter. The line to the manager's office was dead, and my phone wouldn't get service. I stayed in the back room for the rest of the shift, heart pounding. I asked Mark about the building's history when I saw him the next day. He told me that before Subway, the space had been a diner, a greasy spoon kind of place that had been shut down after a fire years ago. The rumor was that someone died in the fire, but details were vague. I felt my skin crawl. One of the other employees, Lisa, who worked the morning shifts, told me she'd sometimes hear voices and see shadows in the store before opening, but she thought it was just the old building. I started to dread my shifts. One night around midnight, the power cut out. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie red glow over the store. I was standing near the bread racks when I heard a scraping sound from the front door. It was slow and deliberate, like nails dragging down the metal frame. I grabbed my phone flashlight and cautiously moved toward the door. The lock was still engaged, but the door was shaking slightly. I backed away and called Mark, but the line was still dead. The fluorescent lights flickered back on after a few minutes, but the atmosphere had shifted. The store felt colder, heavier. After that, every night was a battle to keep my nerves in check. The weird noises continued. Tapping, whispering, footsteps. One night, while closing, I was restocking the fridge when I heard a voice say my name. It was soft and breathy, like it came from just behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. I bolted to the back office, locked the door, and sat shaking until my shift ended. I quit the job the next day. Looking back, I'm still not sure what happened in that subway. Was it haunted, or just a product of too many late nights alone in a creepy old building? Either way, I never went back. Sometimes when I drive past that strip mall, I see the lights flicker inside the dark windows. And I swear, I hear the faintest whisper calling my name. Story the end. The night shift at the subway where I worked was mostly uneventful. The kind of job where the worst things you dealt with were picky customers or slow service. I was 21 at the time, just trying to save up some money before moving out of my parents' place. The store was tucked into a sleepy strip mall on the edge of a medium-sized town, a spot where most nights you could count the customers on one hand. I had taken the closing shifts because the pay was slightly better, and I liked the quiet time to think. That particular evening started like any other. I clocked in at 4 p.m., did my usual rundown with the outgoing shift, and prepped the ingredients for the night. The lunch rush had been light, and after 9 p.m., the store slowed to a near ghost town. I cleaned the tables, restocked the sauces, and occasionally wiped down the sandwich station. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the faint sound of cars passing on the nearby highway filled the silence. At about 10:15 p.m., the door chimed. I looked up to see a man walk in. He was in his late 30s, tall, with disheveled dark hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in weeks. He wore a heavy jacket despite the warm summer air, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. "Hi, welcome to Subway," I said, forcing a smile. He nodded but didn't say anything. "What can I get for you tonight?" I asked. Still no response. He just stood there, staring at the menu board as if trying to decide, but his eyes looked distant. I waited a moment longer before offering again. "Anything in particular?" He finally said, "Just a sandwich. Turkey." I started assembling it while he stayed silent, watching me. Something about his presence was unsettling, but I shrugged it off as just another odd customer. People can be strange sometimes. After handing him the sandwich, I asked if he wanted anything else. "No," he said quietly. He paid with crumpled bills and left without another word. The quiet returned, and I went back to cleaning. At 11 p.m., I started my closing routine. I wiped down all the surfaces, swept the floor, and prepared to close the doors at midnight. As I was about to turn off the open sign, the door chimed again. I looked up to see the same man standing there, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him was a teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, skinny and wearing a hoodie. Neither said a word. The man stepped forward and said, "We're hungry." I nodded and asked what they wanted. The man ordered 2 sandwiches, but his tone was different now. Sharper, more commanding. I felt uneasy. While I was making the sandwiches, the teenager suddenly moved closer to the counter and started tapping his fingers nervously. I glanced up, and our eyes met for a brief moment. There was something wild in his gaze, like a trapped animal. When I handed them the food, the man said, "Thanks." They left quickly. I locked the door behind them. But then I heard a noise, faint footsteps outside. I looked through the front window. No one. Minutes later, a tapping sound came from the back door. The back door was always locked during my shift. I approached cautiously. Suddenly, the handle rattled. I jumped back, heart pounding. The door stayed closed. I called my manager to ask if anyone had permission to come in. No one. I stayed alert. After locking everything securely, I finished closing the store. Then I turned off the lights and started walking to my car in the parking lot. The night was unnaturally still. No crickets, no breeze. Suddenly I heard footsteps behind me. I quickened my pace. Then a voice behind me whispered, "Wait." I froze. I turned slowly. No one there. I got into my car and locked the doors. The engine wouldn't start. I tried again and again, but it just clicked. Panicking, I looked up and saw the 2 figures, the man and the teenager, standing at the edge of the parking lot, staring at me. I tried calling my manager and the police, but my phone was dead. I sat frozen, watching them. They didn't move. Then, as if something snapped, they both turned and vanished into the shadows. The car started immediately after. I sped away, never looking back. The next day, I told my manager everything. She said a similar story had happened to the night crew a few weeks earlier. Strange customers, mysterious noises, cars that wouldn't start. Some employees quit. I asked the regulars if anyone recognized the man or the boy. No one had seen them before. After that night, I asked to be moved to day shifts. I never worked late again at that Subway. Sometimes, when I drive past, I catch a glimpse of a figure standing inside, watching. I'm still not sure what they wanted or why they appeared, but I do know that some nights it's better to just lock the door and not look back. Story the end. Working the late shift at the Subway on the edge of town had become a routine part of my life. I was about 6 months in, juggling college classes and part-time jobs, and this place was the easiest gig I'd found. Simple tasks, decent pay, and mostly quiet nights. The restaurant was tucked into a small strip mall, sandwiched between a gas station and a tiny liquor store. It was the kind of spot where locals stopped by for a quick bite or a late-night snack, but after 9 p.m., the place often emptied out, leaving me alone to close. Most nights, it was just the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint sizzle of the toaster ovens as I wiped down counters and prepped the vegetables for the next day. The work was mindless. which made it easy to zone out or listen to music on my phone. But one night, that peace shattered. It was a chilly Thursday evening in late October. I was working the closing shift from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., just me and the empty tables. The last customers had left around 9:30 p.m., and I was busy cleaning the sandwich station. As I rinsed the lettuce, the front door chimed, the unmistakable bell that signaled someone had entered or left. I looked up, expecting to see a customer wanting one last sandwich, but the doorway was empty. The parking lot outside was dark and deserted, save for a lone street lamp flickering in the distance. I frowned, thinking maybe the sensor was faulty. I went back to work, but then the door chimed again and again. Each time, no one was there. The sound was becoming unnerving, echoing through the empty restaurant. Walked over to the door and pressed my face against the glass, scanning the parking lot. Nothing. Nothing. No movement. No footsteps crunching on the gravel. The chime sounded again. Ding! And then the door handle rattled slightly, as if someone was trying to open it. My heart skipped a beat. I called out, "Hello?" But the only response was silence. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered and dimmed, casting long shadows across the counters. I blinked, and the lights snapped back on. I shook off the creeping feeling in my chest. "It's just a glitch," I muttered. I turned to return to the sandwich prep station when I noticed something odd. A sandwich wrapper on the counter. It wasn't one I had made or wrapped. The plastic was crinkled as if it had been handled, and the sandwich inside looked freshly made, with layers of meat and vegetables neatly stacked. I frowned and glanced at the prep board. No orders were pending. I definitely hadn't made that sandwich. My skin prickled. I reached out cautiously, but before I could touch it, the lights flickered again, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. I could see my breath, misting in front of me. A cold whisper brushed past my ear, so faint I barely caught the words, "Leave." I spun around. The restaurant was empty. The tables gleamed under the harsh light, but no one was there. I swallowed hard and backed toward the door. The handle was locked, but I could hear faint scratching noises coming from the kitchen area behind me, metal scraping against tile. I grabbed a nearby broomstick and crept toward the sound. Peering around the corner, I saw the knives on the magnetic strip rattling as if something unseen was trying to dislodge them. The scraping grew louder, more frantic. I yelled, "Hey, is someone there?" No answer. Suddenly, the sandwich wrapper crinkled on the counter as if something moved inside it. The plastic shifted closer toward the edge. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of napkins. The room plunged into darkness. The fluorescent lights died completely, leaving me in pitch black. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight app. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the sandwich wrapper now at the very edge of the counter. The sandwich inside seemed to pulse under the light, as if breathing. A shadow flickered behind the sandwich, and I heard a low hiss. "Leave." I dropped the phone in shock. The lights flickered back on. The sandwich was gone. I sprinted to the door, jiggled the lock, and it clicked open. I didn't look back as I dashed outside into the cold night. The parking lot was empty again. The street lamp flickered wildly, then went dark. The next day, I told the manager, Marissa, about what happened. She gave me a skeptical look and said the power had been acting up because of storms, and maybe someone was playing pranks. I wanted to believe her, but the fear lingered. On my next shift, I avoided the prep station entirely. But as I cleaned the dining area, I kept hearing whispers and feeling cold drafts that no door or window could explain. The door chimed randomly throughout the evening, but each time the lot was empty. A week later, a coworker called me from the store during my day off. She was shaking, telling me she'd seen a figure standing by the door when she arrived for her shift. When she looked again, the figure vanished. We agreed to close early the next night and switch shifts. Still, the feeling of being watched persisted. One night, after everyone had left and I was locking up, the back kitchen door creaked open by itself. I walked in to find all the sandwich ingredients scattered across the floor, despite having cleaned the area thoroughly earlier. I heard footsteps approaching, but saw no one. The air grew frigid again, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned, but nothing was there. I fled the restaurant and never returned to that shift. Months later, I heard the subway had shut down suddenly. Rumors swirled about strange occurrences and unexplained noises late at night. Even now, I sometimes hear the door chime echoing in my dreams, and the cold whisper still warns me, leave. Story, the end. Working the night shift at a Subway restaurant wasn't something I imagined would be scary. It was just a part-time job to get by, nothing special. The store was tucked into a corner of a busy strip mall on the edge of town, surrounded by a few other small shops, a gas station, and a 24-hour laundromat. It was the kind of place people stopped by late at night for a quick meal before heading home or hitting the road. I started there in the fall, my first real job after high school. The first few weeks went smoothly. I learned how to make sandwiches quickly, handled the register, and kept the store clean. The customers were mostly regulars, truck drivers, night shift workers from nearby factories, a couple of students who liked the late hours. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then after about a month, things started to change. It began with small, almost unnoticeable things. The lights flickered more than usual. Sometimes when I was wiping down the tables, I'd get this strange chill, like the air suddenly dropped several degrees. I chalked it up to the old air conditioning unit acting up. The walk-in cooler had a strange hum that sometimes felt off-pitch, but again, nothing I thought too much about. One night I was closing alone. It was around 11:45 p.m., and the last customer had left about 20 minutes earlier. I was stacking the sandwich bread when I heard a faint noise coming from the back storage room. It sounded like someone scratching at the wall. I froze and listened. It stopped. I tried to shake it off and went to check the storage room. The door was locked, but the manager had given me a key for emergencies. When I opened it, the room was empty. No sign of anything unusual. Just boxes of supplies stacked neatly. That same night, as I returned to the counter, I noticed something strange. On the floor near the sandwich station was a small, crumpled piece of paper. I picked it up and unfolded it. Written in shaky handwriting was the word, help. I stared at it, heart pounding. I looked around the empty store, the quiet hum of the refrigeration unit seeming louder than ever. I stuffed the note into my pocket, telling myself it was a prank. Maybe one of the other employees left it there for fun. But the unease settled deeper. The next few nights were worse. I kept hearing the scratching noises from the storage room, sometimes accompanied by whispering. The voices were unintelligible, barely above a breath. The lights flickered again, sometimes cutting out for a second or two. One night, while I was preparing a sandwich, I looked up and saw a shadow move across the dining area. The security cameras I had on my phone showed nothing. I told the manager about it the next day. She laughed it off, saying the place was old and the wiring was probably to blame. But I noticed she avoided the storage room door, never going near it after hours. Then came the incident that convinced me I had to quit. It was late, past midnight. I was alone, cleaning the floor near the back exit when I heard the door chime. I turned quickly. No customers. The door was locked. The chime sounded again, and this time I heard footsteps approaching from the dining area. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No response. The footsteps stopped right behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. Then I felt a cold hand grip my wrist. I yanked my arm free and bolted toward the front door, heart racing. I fumbled with the locks, desperate to get out. Once outside, the parking lot was empty, the only sound the faint hum of distant traffic. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I told the manager I was quitting. She didn't ask why. Weeks later, I heard the subway close down for structural repairs. Employees whispered about strange occurrences, and some claimed to have seen a pale figure in the store after hours. I never went back. Sometimes when I'm driving past that strip mall, I see the lights flicker in the darkened subway, and I wonder what still lingers inside. Story, the end. The subway where I worked was in a small town in the Midwest. Not a big city or anything, just a quiet place where everybody knew everybody else's business. The restaurant itself was old, the kind of place that seemed like it had been there forever. It sat near a busy highway, so it got some steady traffic during the day, but the real cash came from the late-night crowd. I worked the graveyard shift, usually from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., because the pay was better and there was less supervision. I liked it at first. It was quiet, and I could listen to music while I worked. The manager, Dave, was an older guy who had been with the company for decades. He always warned me about the strange stuff that went down at night, but never gave me any details. Just vague stuff about weird noises, things moving, and customers who disappear. I laughed it off, thinking he was just messing with me. The first few weeks were normal. Just a handful of customers, mostly truckers and night shift workers. The usual sandwich orders, the cleaning, restocking the bread and veggies. But then I started noticing odd things. It was subtle at first. A sandwich ingredient missing or a loaf of bread misplaced. Nothing too strange until one night around 2 a.m., I was wiping down the tables when I heard the front door chime. A customer? At that hour? I looked up and saw a man standing outside, soaked from the rain, staring in at me. I didn't recognize him. He was wearing old dirty clothes, like something out of a different decade. When I unlocked the door to let him in, he didn't move, just stood there, silently. I asked, "Can I help you?" No response. I looked closer. His eyes were dull, lifeless, and his skin was pale, almost translucent. It made my skin crawl. I stepped back. Suddenly he disappeared. Just like that. I blinked, and the door was empty. I thought maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion, so I closed and locked the door and called Dave to tell him about it. He told me not to worry and to just keep an eye out. The next night, I found wet footprints on the floor behind the counter. They were large, bare feet, but the weird part was the pattern. They weren't human. They curved strangely, like the person was walking on the side of their foot, or maybe even backward. I tried to clean them off quickly, but they reappeared every night after closing. One night, after everyone had left, I was closing up when I heard muffled voices coming from the walk-in freezer. The door was locked, but the voices were clear, whispering, pleading. I slowly opened the freezer door, expecting to see someone hiding or messing around. Nothing, just cold air and stacked boxes. But when I closed the door, I noticed a smear on the inside panel, a bloody handprint. My heart raced. I called Dave immediately. He sounded nervous on the phone and told me to leave right away and never come back until the day shift. I went home and couldn't sleep. My phone kept buzzing, but every time I checked, there was no message or caller. The following week, more strange things happened. Lights flickered on and off, the speakers emitted static, and the security cameras sometimes showed shadows moving when no one was there. One night, while making a sandwich, I caught a glimpse of a woman in a subway apron standing near the bread station. When I turned to speak to her, she vanished. I stopped working the graveyard shift shortly after. The store eventually closed down, and the building was abandoned. Years later, I found out that decades ago, a Subway employee was murdered in that very store during the night shift. They never found the killer. I'm convinced her spirit still lingers there, trapped, trying to reach out to anyone who works those lonely hours. Story the end. The Subway where I worked was nothing special, just a small, quiet store tucked away in a strip mall on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where the most exciting thing that happened was the occasional group of kids coming in after school, chattering and picking out their favorite sandwiches. For me, it was just a job to pay the bills while I was in college. The shifts were easy, mostly boring, and sometimes a little lonely, especially the late-night ones. My first few weeks there went smoothly. I learned the routines, how to prepare sandwiches quickly, restock the ingredients, and keep the store clean. The staff was friendly, and the manager trusted me enough to let me work closing shifts alone. Those nights were peaceful, if a bit dull. The customers slowed down after 8 p.m., and sometimes I'd be the only person in the building, finishing cleaning tasks and waiting for closing time. But one night, everything changed. It was early November, and the air outside had started to get cold and damp. I was scheduled to close that Thursday. I arrived at the store around 3 p.m. as usual and worked the afternoon shift. The store was busier than normal, thanks to some local football game letting out early. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, my manager left, wishing me a good night and reminding me to lock up when I finished. After 7 p.m., the customers slowed to a trickle. I wiped down the counters and restocked the veggie trays, my mind wandering as I worked. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The security cameras monitored the empty dining area, and the digital clock on the wall ticked toward 9 p.m. At about 8:45, the doorbell jingled sharply. I looked up to see a man walk in. He was tall and lean, dressed in a dark hoodie zipped up all the way, with the hood pulled low over his head. His face was obscured, and he wore sunglasses even though the lights inside were bright. Something about him made me uneasy, but I told myself not to overthink it. "Hi, welcome to Subway. What can I get for you?" I said, forcing a smile. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, silent, staring at the menu board. His posture was stiff, almost robotic. I felt a chill creep down my spine. "Sir, are you ready to order?" Still no answer. After a moment, he finally spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. "Meatball on Italian bread. No cheese. No veggies." I nodded and started making the sandwich, my hands shaking slightly. The air felt heavier now, thick and cold. When I handed him the wrapped sandwich, he dropped a crumpled $20 bill on the counter and shuffled out without a word. I locked the door behind him, but my unease didn't fade. 10 minutes later, the doorbell jingled again. The same man stepped inside, standing near the entrance without moving or speaking. His eyes were hidden, but I could feel his gaze on me. "You're alone tonight," he said suddenly, his voice a whisper. "Yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just me." He took a slow step toward the counter. "It's dangerous to be alone." A shiver ran through me. I stepped back instinctively. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out, plunging the store into darkness. The emergency lights blinked on, bathing the room in an eerie red glow. I fumbled for my phone but realized it was dead. No signal. In the dim red light, I saw the man was gone. Then I heard it, a scraping sound coming from the kitchen door at the back of the store. Fingernails dragging across metal. I froze. The kitchen door rattled as if someone was trying to open it. "Who's there?" I called, voice trembling. No answer. Panic surged through me. I grabbed the keys from the counter and ran out the back door into the alley. I locked the door behind me and didn't stop running until I was in my car. Heart pounding. I called my manager the next day and told her what happened. She told me to take a few days off, but I never returned to that Subway. Even now, months later, when I'm alone in my apartment, I swear I hear the faint sound of scraping nails and that cold voice whispering, "You're alone." Story, the end. Working the night shift at Subway was supposed to be simple. I needed the money, and the job seemed straightforward enough. Prepare sandwiches, clean up, restock, and close the store alone. The location was in a small strip mall on the outskirts of town, a place where the streets emptied quickly after dark and the occasional customer trickled in before midnight. I was 21, going through community college, and needed the extra cash. The first few nights were uneventful. The quiet allowed me to catch up on podcasts or just zone out while wiping down counters. But after a week or two, I started noticing odd things. The lights in the store would flicker occasionally. Nothing consistent, just a brief strobe of the fluorescent tubes overhead. I assumed it was just the wiring in the old building or the cheap bulbs. Occasionally, I'd hear what sounded like footsteps outside the front door, even though the parking lot was empty and the doors locked. I told myself it was the wind or a stray animal. One night, around 11:30 p.m., the store was dead silent except for the hum of the refrigeration units and the faint buzz of the neon Subway sign outside. I was finishing up cleaning the prep area when the door chime rang. Ding! I looked toward the entrance, but no one was there. The parking lot was empty and rain was steadily falling, making the pavement glisten under the dim street lamps. I figured it was the sensor malfunctioning, but my heart thudded a little harder than usual. A few minutes later, I went to the back storage room to grab more napkins when I heard a faint, whispering sound. It was so soft I couldn't make out words, but it definitely wasn't in my head. I froze for a second, then called out, "Hello?" No response. The whispering stopped abruptly. I chalked it up to exhaustion. The next night was worse. About an hour before closing, I noticed the security cameras glitching on the monitor. Static fuzz would appear and then vanish, and sometimes the feed would freeze on one of the prep tables, but no one was there. When the feed came back, I saw a shadowy figure in the corner of one camera, but when I checked the spot in person, it was empty. I texted my manager to ask if anyone else had been in the store, but no one had. The strangest incident happened on a Saturday. It was raining heavily and the streets were deserted. I was alone, doing inventory, when the front door suddenly creaked open. The chime rang loudly, echoing through the empty store. I jumped and ran toward the entrance, but no one was there. The door was locked behind the entryway glass, but somehow it was ajar. Wet footprints led from the door to the front counter, but no one had been inside. I locked the door again, checked the locks twice, and called my manager. The line was dead. My phone had no signal. For the first time, I felt genuinely afraid. After that, I began noticing cold spots around the store, particularly near the sandwich prep area and the drink coolers. I'd be wiping the counter and suddenly shiver, feeling a breath on the back of my neck, but turning around to find nothing. One night, the power went out completely for about 10 minutes. The emergency lights flickered on with a faint red glow. I was wiping the floor when I heard the sound of scraping fingernails along the back door, slow and deliberate. I froze, heart pounding, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The scraping stopped suddenly, and when the power returned, the back door was locked, and there were no marks on the floor. I called my manager the next day and told her everything. She sighed and told me that this subway had a reputation for being haunted. Apparently, a woman had died there years ago under mysterious circumstances when the place was still a different restaurant. Some customers had reported strange noises and cold spots over the years. I laughed it off, but I couldn't deny what I had experienced. The last straw came one night when I was closing the store alone. Around 11:45 p.m., I was about to lock the front door when the lights flickered violently and then went out entirely. The only illumination was the glow from the streetlights outside. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, panicked, and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature dropped sharply. I could see my breath fogging the air. Then I heard a voice, a low, raspy whisper saying my name over and over. It sounded like it came from inside the walls. I banged on the door, yelling for help, but no one was around. After what felt like hours, the lights flickered back on. The door unlocked, and I ran out without looking back. I quit the next day. That subway closed down a few months later. Even now, when I drive past the strip mall late at night, I swear I can see the lights flicker inside the dark windows, and sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear the faint sound of a whisper calling my name. Story. The end. Working at Subway wasn't exactly a dream job, but for me, it was just another gig to keep the bills paid while I was trying to finish college. The restaurant was tucked away in a strip mall on the edge of town, a spot that saw more emptiness than traffic during the late-night shifts I was assigned to. I worked mostly the closing shifts, starting in the afternoon and staying until after midnight, often alone once the dinner crowd had thinned out. Most nights, the job was boring enough that I could zone out and daydream about better things. But one night, something happened that changed the way I felt about working alone in a quiet place forever. It was a Thursday night, just past 11 p.m., and I was in the middle of wiping down tables and sweeping the floor. The last customer had left about 45 minutes earlier, and the store was dimly lit with only the glow from the neon "open" sign reflecting faintly off the glass door. I had the music playing low to keep me company, a mix of old-school hip-hop and mellow indie tracks. I was nearly done with the closing routine when the door chimed suddenly. I looked up, startled. No one was supposed to be here after 11 p.m. I glanced toward the door and saw a man stepping inside. He was wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled tight over his head, shadowing his face. I couldn't see much, but something about the way he moved felt off. Slow, deliberate, like he was savoring the moment. "Hi," I said, forcing a smile. "We're about to close soon, but I can still make you a sandwich." He didn't answer, just stood there by the counter, looking around like he was taking in every detail of the restaurant. I tried again. "What can I get for you?" Still nothing. I stepped closer. "Sir?" Then he raised his head slightly. His eyes caught the fluorescent light. They were dark, but deep-set, almost lifeless. It made me uncomfortable. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Italian BMT, no cheese, light on the veggies." I hurried to make the sandwich, not wanting to give him too much time to stare. His gaze followed every movement I made. When I finished, he pulled out some crumpled bills, counting out the money slowly. His hands trembled, and I noticed he wasn't wearing shoes, just socks. That made my skin crawl. He took the sandwich, said thanks, and left without another word. I locked the door behind him and exhaled sharply. Then the store fell into an eerie silence. About 10 minutes later, I heard something, soft scratching near the back door. I froze. That door was locked and alarmed after hours. I slowly walked toward it, trying to see through the small window in the metal door. Nothing, just darkness. Then I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, moving around outside the kitchen window. My heart pounded. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator asked what was wrong. I told her there was someone outside the back of the restaurant making noise, possibly trying to get in. She told me to stay on the line and keep the door locked. Suddenly, the sound of the front door opening. I spun around to see the man from earlier standing inside again. His hood was off now. His face was pale and his dark eyes were fixed on me. "Why are you still here?" I asked, voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward. I backed away toward the office, locking the door behind me. I could hear footsteps approaching. Then a knock. Soft, deliberate. I stayed silent, clutching the phone. The police arrived minutes later, bursting through the front door. They searched the place, but found no one. The man had vanished. They said they'd patrol the area more. After that night, I never worked alone again. Even months later, sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure outside the window when I left the restaurant late at night. I learned that sometimes the most ordinary places can feel the most frightening when you're all alone. Story the end. Working the late shift at Subway was never supposed to be anything more than a dull, part-time job to help pay for college. The store was a small, unremarkable place in a rundown strip mall on the edge of a mid-sized city. Most nights, I closed alone from 6 p.m. until midnight, cleaning, restocking, and occasionally taking orders if any late customers showed up. I was used to the quiet, the repetitive sounds of the store, the beep of the register, the whir of the refrigerator compressors, the occasional chatter of a customer, but nothing prepared me for what would come that fall. It started out with little things, strange noises in the middle of the night when the store was empty, the lights flickering in a way that felt unnatural. At first, I thought I was just overtired. I worked late hours after long days of classes and barely slept on weekends. But the atmosphere at Subway began to feel heavier, like a weight pressing down on me the longer I stayed after dark. One chilly October evening, about 3 months into my job, I was working the closing shift. The day had been slow, and the last customers had left an hour ago. I was wiping down the tables when the front door chimed, the unmistakable sound that signaled someone had entered or left. I glanced up, expecting to see a late-night traveler looking for a sandwich, but the door was closed. No one was there. I frowned and approached the door, peering outside. The parking lot was empty and dimly lit by the flickering street lamps. A cold wind swept past, carrying the scent of wet leaves and something else, something faintly metallic. Shrugging it off as a glitch, I returned to the counter. But then the door chimed again, and again. Each time, no one entered or exited. Unease crawled up my spine. I grabbed my phone and looked at the security cameras, which I had access to in the back office. The screens showed the front door, the dining area, the kitchen, and the back storage room. I flipped through them looking for any signs of movement. Nothing. The front door sensor was triggering on its own, or something was causing it to. The air inside the store felt colder now. I rubbed my arms, trying to warm up. I decided to finish the cleaning quickly and leave. As I wiped the counters, I thought I saw a shadow move in the corner of the dining area on the monitor, near the far wall by the restrooms. I zoomed in and adjusted the brightness, but the shadow was gone. I was probably imagining things. As I swept the floor near the kitchen, I heard a faint scraping noise coming from the walk-in freezer door. The sound was subtle, like metal scraping on metal, but it stopped as soon as I turned toward it. My breath caught. I told myself it was a rat or some piece of equipment shifting. I finished cleaning and was about to lock the door when the lights flickered violently. The whole store dimmed, then surged back to full brightness. A chill filled the air, and the door chimed once more. Suddenly, the sandwich prep station's scale started beeping repeatedly, as if someone was placing items on it rapidly. I rushed over, but nothing was there. The lights flickered again, and the back kitchen door creaked open slowly on its own. I froze. Swallowing my fear, I walked back to close it. The kitchen was empty. The walk-in fridge hummed quietly. Nothing seemed out of place, except the air was ice cold. Then I heard a low whisper, barely audible, like someone saying, "Leave, leave now," right behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but no one was there. I grabbed my phone and called my manager, but there was no answer. I decided to get out of there fast. As I locked the door behind me, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the glass, a dark figure standing just inside the store, near the condiment station. I blinked, and it was gone. I ran to my car, hands trembling, and drove away. The next day, I told my coworkers, but they dismissed it as stress or exhaustion. A few mentioned the subway had a reputation for odd occurrences over the years, but no one wanted to talk about it openly. I tried to forget the incident, but it haunted me. Weeks later, I returned for another night shift, this time with a friend to close with me. Around 10 p.m., as we cleaned, the door chimed again and again with no one there. The temperature dropped suddenly, our breaths visible in the cold air. We heard scraping and whispering, and the lights flickered nonstop. Suddenly, the back door slammed shut, locking us inside. We banged on it, but no one answered. Eventually, the door creaked open by itself. We didn't wait to find out what had caused it. We quit the next day. The subway eventually closed down permanently, and the strip mall replaced it with a nail salon. Sometimes I still hear the faint chime of the door in my dreams, and the whisper telling me to leave. Story, the end.